Does spiritual awakening destroy the ego? And my answer is no. Spiritual awakening does not destroy the ego. But before we get into it, let's understand what exactly is ego. Ego is identification with the name and form as a separate entity. And that remains still the human organism is alive, because without that, daily life, daily functioning, daily interaction is not possible. You do need the ego to survive on this plane. Now, here's the thing, but the ego needs to be understood. What exactly is ego? Let me give you an example. Let's say you have a reaction to something, to some unkind comment or rude behavior that you got from, let's say, a friend or a relative or a loved one, and all of a sudden you reacted. Okay, you said, how dare you say this to me, and it just went on. That is not ego. That is the natural reaction of the biological organism. The conditioned entity is simply reacting to a statement based on its conditioning. That is not ego. The ego is the one that comes up afterwards as thinking. So the thinking afterwards, after all this reaction has happened, it comes up as, how dare they? I'm going to teach them a lesson. I will never forgive them. The ego is the one that keeps and lives in resentment, jealousy, malice, hatred, spite, which continues in horizontal time as suffering. That is the ego. Or it can come up in the other form, where it feels guilt and remorse and says, and shame, and says that why did I act like this? Why am I so, why am I bad? I should not have behaved in this manner. And keeps berating oneself for thinking that it was one's own action. So anything which brings attention to itself and continues in horizontal time as obsessive thinking. I should have done this, I should not have done that, I should have said this, I should not have said that, I did bad deeds in the past, I did not do good deeds ever, I should have done better, I should have, could have, would have, this is the way it should be, this is the way it should not be. All these dialogues that come up within, they are the part of the ego mind system. So what spiritual awakening does is that it creates a dent into the structure of the ego. Let me explain this with the help of an iceberg. Now, let's say this is the level of the ocean. There is iceberg which is visible on top, but there is also an iceberg, a huge iceberg, which is visible at the bottom, but the top and the bottom are both same. Now, spiritual awakening causes a dent into the entire thing. Now, it doesn't destroy the iceberg, because if the iceberg is gone, completely gone, melted into the ocean, then the human organism there will be no human organism to interact, because there are some basic things, like when you're hungry, you know that you have to eat food. Where does that sense come from? That is intelligence, right? That is innate intelligence. But that intelligence is a part of the ecosystem. It is for oneself to make sure that one is healthy and eat on time, sleep on time, take care of oneself, engage in creative work. This is all functional ego, or what Ramesh called as the working mind, which is there to sustain the organism, to help the organism survive in the world. To have a meaningful interaction, one does require ego. For example, if I did not have an ego, I would not be able to communicate with you. But this ego that facilitates communication, that facilitates survival, sustenance, is not the problem. The problem is the thinking mind. The ego that jumps in horizontal time as obsessive thinking. I should have done that. I should not have done this. I am like this. I am like that. That is the problem ego. That is what is underneath the iceberg, that is underneath the ocean. So, spiritual awakening is a dent in the persona, in the personality, in the ego system. But the size of the iceberg slowly shrinks as one proceeds. And in this shrinking process, which happens after spiritual awakening, which I call as the deliverance, slowly this understanding comes that there is no separate self. The notion of a separate self is an illusion, and this understanding is of the ego. The ego wakes up to its own illusory existence. Now, what happens? Still, the person continues the way they want to continue. They will pursue spirituality or any other thing they want to. They will behave more or less the same as they want to. They may react also many times, but the number of reactions reduce. And also, since now the ego has reduced in size, nothing sticks to horizontal time as shame, blame, guilt, malice, spite, envy, jealousy. But in the moment, everything is experienced. A sage or a saint is not the one without an ego, because even Ramesh Balsekar said this. Did Ramana Maharishi have an ego? And he said yes. Even Ramana Maharishi had an ego, because when somebody called Ramana Maharishi, he turned and looked. So it is not possible to kill the ego, to destroy the ego. And ego is not all bad. Ego is there for a specific purpose. Now, let's consider another point. So why do the masters say that the ego is not real? Here's my concept. Ego is real, but ego is not the truth. I exist only when I think that I am separate. When I think about myself, only then I exist as a separate entity. But when I'm just about my way and just doing things randomly here and there is no me that is doing anything. So what the ego fundamentally is made up of is awareness. Awareness is the source, it's the substratum of all arising. And every arising is of the ego. But not all arising is bad. We think that by killing the ego, we will achieve a state of perfection where we will never experience any sadness or unhappiness. But that's not true. Most people, after spiritual awakening, experience a lot of depression, a lot of sadness, and that I covered in another video. I will link to it in the description if you want to see that. Majority of people experience a lot of depression, a lot of conflict, confusion, because there is a crack in the iceberg, which is the separate self or the ego. And all this conditioning which we have been fed since childhood, that you should be this, you should be that, you should achieve this, attain that, materially, spiritually, in family life, have big goals, that will give you happiness. All of those thoughts, beliefs, they begin to, there's a crack in the iceberg, so you begin to challenge them, and that creates a tussle between two systems of thoughts. One thought says, no, stick with that thinking, that line of thinking, because it's safe. The other one says, no, it's not the truth. So there is a conflict. But what happens slowly as the ego shrinks in the light of awareness and restores itself to basic normal daily living, daily functioning, it experiences a lot of peace and calm. That is when it is realized that ego itself is an illusion. So ego is real, but ego is not the truth. Because ego or the separate self is not your continuous experience. In deep sleep, you do not experience ego. So if you believe that somehow awakening is going to make you into this perfect human being that all the time experiences bliss and never experiences any turbulent emotion, you are mistaken. That has not been my experience. And I have met I have met many sadhus. I have met many masters, spiritual teachers, and I have seen them exhibit all kinds of emotions, including anger, jealousy. Look at how some of the masters fight amongst themselves, and they are so identified with their own teaching, with their own philosophy. This is right, this is the way it should be. Some people, when they are questioned, they are thrown out of the satsang. Yes, the ego is there. Does that all make them bad or make the teaching bad? No, not at all. Every spiritual teaching is a concept, and even spiritual awakening is a concept. When one remembers that, that brings a lot of peace. But when you start seeking awakening, thinking that I can do something to awaken, that is when the suffering perpetuates. You keep on comparing yourself to the image that you project of yourself, an idealized image that somehow once I attain liberation, moksha, or anything, any fancy thing that you want to call it, I will be happy, I will be peaceful, I will live in perfect harmony. But world is not like that, life is not like that. Even in fact, the human system is not like that. The biological organism will experience all emotions even after awakening. It's just that there will be no getting caught up into it. Yes, you will experience reactivity, but you will instantly watch it at the same time. You will instantly know that this is not real. This is just happening. It is an arising. An arising is not the reality. The space that is facilitating this arising, that is the reality, and that is what the masters are pointing us to. But we get caught up in the debate as to what is real awakening, what is fake awakening. Fake awakening is a concept, and so is real awakening also a concept. The person does not awaken. The person is the separate self, is the ego. Ego does not awaken. Awakening happens. And when awakening happens, it is usually, for most people, it is painful. Even for Buddha, when the awakening happened at the four sides, it was painful for him. That started seeking. And that seeking led to insight, what people think as enlightenment, or I call it insight, where he pronounced his four principles, four noble truths. And the first noble truth is samsara is dukkha. If samsara is dukkha, and that is the first noble truth, then how can one say that in real awakening, the person never feels any depression or any suffering? Till one strongly identifies oneself as the limited entity or the ego or the separate self, the suffering continues. But when that notion begins to dissolve, even then the pain continues, but it does not lead to suffering. That's the only concept. So that reflects in daily living. One goes about their regular work, their regular job, do regular things. One is not caught up in unnecessary rituals or trying to prove oneself. But yes, to think that there is some permanent state that will be attained and it will bring all bliss and no pain, well, I may be wrong. Who knows? I may be wrong. Maybe there is some enlightenment. But I have not experienced it so far, and I don't even want it. Because what brought me peace is the unconditional acceptance of life the way it is, with all its ups and downs. I'm not a sage or a guru or a teacher of any kind. I'm just sharing my experience with you. But Here is what the masters have said. Here is what Ramesh Balsekar said, that imagine a sine wave. So in the case where awakening has not happened, the amplitude of the wave is high. You experience the highs of life, and the lower one is the low. You experience the extreme highs and the extreme lows, extreme highs, extreme lows. That is how your life proceeds. But when the awakening happens and there is a dent in the structure, for some time the pattern continues, but then it eventually begins to subside and the amplitudes are not as high. The highs are not so high, the lows are not so low. They are more or less stable, steady. That is what he means when he says that one remains anchored in peace. It does not mean that one does not experience pain. Life is pain. Even the scriptures have said that life is like an imprisonment. It is painful. To say that there is something in this life that you can grasp and that will not cause you to experience any suffering is living in delusion. Might as well accept that life is a never-ending cycle of pain and pleasure, and accepting both and clinging to none is relief. Nisargadatta Maharaj says, the river of my life flows between the banks of pain and pleasure, but I cling to none. So when I cling to none, what happens? I just flow with life. And flowing with life is peace. Flowing against the current of life is painful. Idealizing an imaginative state that can bring permanent bliss, enlightenment, or whatever you want to call it, is suffering. Chasing after a permanent state is suffering. So, all in all, my assertion is that no, the ego cannot be killed. It can be brought to a functional level. It can be brought to a level. It can be subdued. Yes, that can happen, and that is also not in the ego's control. The awareness does that. The consciousness, the pure consciousness, the source, call it source or whatever you want to, or God if you want to. That is what does that, not you. You cannot do anything through your efforts. In fact, the very trying to use effort to awaken yourself is going to make you more miserable. The more practices you undertake to awaken yourself, the more your ego, the separate self, will strengthen and cause you more and more pain. That is why masters say, give up the seeking. But the fact is, you cannot even give up the seeking. The seeking will stop only when it is the source's will. So no, the ego does not get destroyed by spiritual awakening. But this is just my concept. I am prepared to be wrong on this one. It is just a concept. All teachings are just concepts. Do remember that. Take care.